We're shooting hamsters and Andy Russell, chapter 12. So remember at the very end of chapter 11, Jason said that he had thrown the hamsters off the balcony, but he said that he tried other things first to make sure that they'd be safe. So like tomatoes and I don't know, can't remember the other thing. But then Aunt Mandy said that was awful, and then she told him to go get the cage and everything, and then they gave the cage to Tom. Remember? Okay, chapter 12. Trouble? When Aunt Mandy opened the door to her apartment, Andy took another look at the two large paintings in the entrance area. He looked at them for a while. When he had first seen the large blotches of blue surrounded by other colors, Andy had thought the paintings were upside down or inside out. Now when he looked at the paintings again, he liked them. Aren't they beautiful? Aunt Mandy asked. The artist is E.J. Nahum. Isn't that the guy who did some of the paintings we saw in the museum? Andy asked. Yes, Aunt Mandy answered proudly. Now wash up and then we'll eat. Andy didn't think he was dirty, but he washed his hands anyway. Then he followed Tamika into the dining room. The lights were dim. Aunt Mandy was sitting at the table, which was beautifully set with a white cloth, gold-trimmed dishes, silver knives, spoons, and forks, tall glasses, and with two lit candles in candlesticks at the center of the table. Uncle Terrence walked in. He was wearing a tuxedo, and his hair was plastered down. He told Aunt Mandy, Andy, and Tamika to sit down, and he gave them each a menu. Then he folded his hands and looked up at the ceiling and said, "Good evening. My name is Terrence, and I will be your waiter." Look at the picture. How funny. He's acting like that creepy waiter, right? Andy, Tamika, and Aunt Mandy looked at Uncle Terrence and laughed. Andy thought that Uncle Terrence, with his plastered down hair, looked a little like Jacques, but Jacques looks like a short, fat penguin, and Uncle Terrence looks like a tall, thin one. Uncle Terrence stared at the ceiling and waited. Uncle Mandy leaned over the table and whispered to Andy and Tamika, "I think we should look at our menus and decide what we want." Andy held his menu up by the candlelight so that he could read it. There were only 4 items on the menu: pancakes with syrup, pancakes with applesauce, pancakes with strawberries, pancakes with pancakes. You know what? Aunt Mandy laughed and said, "I think I'll have breakfast food for dinner. I'll have pancakes." "Me too," Andy and Tamika agreed. Uncle Terrence brought in a large platter of pancakes, bottles of syrup, jars of applesauce, and a bowl of strawberries. He unbuttoned his jacket, took off his bow tie, and sat down with Andy, Tamika, and Aunt Mandy and ate dinner. The next morning, Mr. Russell came to pick Andy and Tamika up. Aunt Mandy invited him to sit on the balcony. She brought out a plate of icing-covered cubes with candy sprinkles. Andy whispered to his father, "You should eat those. There's cake inside, and they're really good. Even everything here is really good." When it was time to leave, Andy and Tamika thanked Aunt Mandy and Uncle Terrence. "I had a great time," Andy said. "I did too," Tamika told them. "We hope you'll come again," Aunt Mandy and Uncle Terrence said. As they drove away from the apartment building, Andy looked at all the tall buildings, the cars, taxis, and buses, and the sidewalks crowded with people. "I really had a good time this weekend," he thought. When Mr. Russell stopped at a traffic light, he turned and asked Andy, "Did you get into any trouble at Aunt Mandy's?" "Trouble?" Andy replied slowly. "Well, I got into lots of trouble, but I got out of it." "None of it was his fault," Tamika said. "You can even call Aunt Mandy. She really liked Andy, and so did Uncle Terrence. They said they hope we'll visit again." "Yes, they did say that," Mr. Russell said, as the light turned green and he drove off. "Now, please, tell me about the trouble." Andy and Tamika took turns telling Mr. Russell everything that had happened at Aunt Mandy's. When they were done, Mr. Russell shook his head and said to Andy, "I just don't know why you always get into so much trouble." Andy was looking out the car window. He turned to his father and said, "I don't either, Dad. I really don't." Dun, dun, dun. Okay, we'll review next.